Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I do recognize that it's 4:30, and I understand actually that they're already serving drinks out there, which makes your attendance here show that you're really dedicated to, knowledge acquisition in some way. Now, how much knowledge you're going to acquire out of this presentation, that'll be another question to be answered, but hopefully there will be some good things I have to share with you. My name is Mike Evans. I'm actually the interim CEO and CFO at Renaissance Learning. One of the things that you may or may not know about Renaissance is we are a company that is all about big data. It's really the focus of everything that we do, and one of the things that I wanted to spend some time talking about this afternoon is I share some thoughts and ideas about two areas in education that are critically important to students, teachers, and parents of students. And that is, how big data can help in understanding how a student's doing in terms of their academic development. And then also wanted to spend some time talking specifically about a subpopulation of students in K-12 education here in the United States, and that's students who are English language learners, kids that don't have English as their native language, and some of the specific challenges that they have, and some of the things that we've done at Renaissance to think about how we can help those students in their academic development. So I thought I would start by just talking a little bit about Renaissance and who we are and what's important to us. And probably the best way to underscore us as a company and the folks who work at Renaissance is to talk a little bit about where we started from. We're a company that today is about 30 years old. We were actually started in the basement, not a garage, in the basement of a home not in California, but in a home in central Wisconsin by a couple named Terry and Judy Paul. Judy Paul was a woman who was a lifelong educator and was looking for ways to help her children learn to read better and to comprehend what they were reading better and build their English fluency and their proficiency. And so for her, she created one of our signature products. It's called Accelerated Reader. It's actually been in the market for close to 30 years now in different ways, shapes, and forms. And actually, Accelerated Reader is a product that is in almost 1/3 of classrooms across the United States. So it's a incredibly important product for helping to develop literacy skills, and one that we're very proud to represent at Renaissance. But I said that I wanted to talk about big data and how that's our focus at Renaissance, and I want to talk about two situations as they relate to big data. The first is really the one that I'm showing here with the example of Krista. So Krista is a 7th grader, and Krista, like a lot of 7th graders, takes interim tests during her school year. I don't know how many of you guys have kids, but if you're like me, who has a couple of boys who are in middle school and in elementary school, they take interim assessment 3 times a year to get an understanding of how their academic progress is developing over time. And we get a longitudinal view of their student progress based upon how they're progressing in terms of scale scores. In the case of Krista, we're looking at her growth from where she stood when she took her interim assessment in the beginning of the school year in the fall, and then where she stood when she finished her winter assessment that she took right after the winter break. And in her case, she grew 33 points on her scale score, which, what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? Is that something in between? In order to give context to that, one of the things that helps us is the idea of what big data brings to bear in sort of understanding Krista and where she stands today and her trajectory that she's on. So one of the ways that we do that is we take a look at the last exam that she took, the exam that she took in the fall, to see who were her peers when she was taking that interim assessment, the last time she took the assessment and the last time kids across her school district and quite frankly across the country took that same assessment. And we find the kids that were similarly positioned to where Krista was at that point in time. And then because we have literally billions of bytes of data on student assessment, We're also able to see the kids who were at her same place not only the last time she took the assessment, but the time before that she took the assessment, to get a sense of, who are her real peers as she sits down to take this winter assessment. And then when we aggregate the results, we can take a look and see how she's grown over the same period of time that peer group has grown. And so what that shows in Krista's case is she's done well. She's had some academic development, but she hasn't done as well as maybe she could have. And so what this is a signal to her, a signal to her teachers, a signal to her parents that there's an opportunity to supplement some of what's happening for her in the classroom in order to accelerate her academic trajectory. So again, just one example that plays out in classrooms across the country 3 times a year in terms of how we can understand how all students are doing and then adjust our instruction to make sure that each child is achieving their greatest potential. So Krista has a non-unique set of circumstances. She has to determine how she can accelerate her learning at the best possible trajectory for herself. But there's a whole nother group of students out there that have to deal with a level of interference that's incredibly unique, and that is English language learners. These are children who are learning in English classrooms, who are being assessed in English classrooms, and there's an expectation that they are progressing just like their native language speaking peers. And this is a challenge that they have that's unique and one that requires a special amount of insight and something that we've been highly focused on at Renaissance. Just taking a look at English language learners in general and trying to get a perspective on what that means across our country. And I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with the level of English language learners that we have in our school population today. Okay, many of you are. 10% of our student population in the US today is classified as English language learners. In the next 10 years, that will grow to 25%. So a huge minority of our school population will be English language learners. And when you think about how kids in the US do in terms of their proficiency, it's regularly mentioned the fact that we don't live up to the level of our international peers, especially in first world countries. But what's interesting is when you take a look at English language learners and their level of proficiency gap and how extreme it is compared to even our student population at large. And so if you look in the case of Texas, in 4th grade, 68% of students are below basic in English and math in that state. And that's not proficiency, that's below basic proficiency. You look at some other states around the country, you see a measure that's closer to 50% of the English language learners achieve that basic proficiency, 50% do not. And then there's one state which will go unmentioned where actually 92% of students who are English language learners are operating at below basic proficiency. So it is a huge achievement gap, and a lot of that achievement gap is the nature of their English language acquisition activities that are going on and actually transcends their subject matter knowledge about a particular area that they're focused on in the classroom. Here we just sort of play out how that changes over time. We talked about 4th graders in specific states. Here we can take a look at how 4th graders are doing in aggregate across the country. And then the more depressing situation being that as those students move to 8th grade, that proficiency drops even further. So that language barrier is a huge issue for students achieving their full potential. So here's the big thing that I wanted to mention to you, though, about English language learners. And what I probably ask you to do is just close your eyes for 1 second and do a visual in your mind of an English language learner. What does that student look like? Well, the one thing I want to tell you is that you may have in your mind a thought about a first-generation immigrant new to this country. But what I want to tell you is that most English language learners are not new immigrants. They're actually 2nd and 3rd generation students who are, for whatever reason, not learning English as their primary language in the home. And I know an awful lot about that because if you look at this picture here, And you look at the 5 children that are shown here, actually 2 of them are English language learners and don't necessarily fit the typical profile. And the reason I know a lot about them, the one on the far right and the one who's second from the left, is they're my 2 sons. The others are their cousins, and they have their Captain America shirts on. They look very nice and everything. But the thing I would tell you about my 2 sons is they're both the byproduct of a guy from Baltimore, which is its own challenge for your academic development. But then also, my wife is a first-generation immigrant from Lithuania. And so it was very important for her to speak to them in Lithuanian in the home, and so that's all she did in their developmental phases. And so their English they got from the guy from Baltimore. And so as they developed over time, when they got to grade school, their English language proficiency wasn't what it needed to be. And so they spent their first 3 years in ELL programs that helped them get to where they needed to be in terms of their literacy proficiency. And that's something that has truly benefited them, not only in terms of their development of English, but their ability to become fully bilingual as they've grown over time. So I put this out there to you. It's certainly an experience that's very near and dear to my heart, just because I have 2 ELL students in my home. But more so just to give you the illustration of ELL students they come in all shapes, all sizes, all colors, and it's something to keep in mind when you think about the breadth of that student population of English language learners that we see today at 10% of the school population across the country, grow into that broader 25% of all students that we'll see. And they have unique challenges. One of the things that has to happen for kids in school is they have to master certain skills, they have to master certain standards. In order to do that, their ability to understand the material that they're seeking to master is critical. So I put up for you an example. This is a basic elementary school ELA exercise. Read the passage, answer one of the, select the multiple choice question. It's a pretty easy exercise to do. So if you just sort of spend a second with this, you'll probably get the answer very quickly, or not. And the or not situation is because this question is probably a lot easier to answer if it's presented in this format. And so the point that I want to make with this is, this very straightforward ELA question, and this very straightforward ELA passage that is the foundation for that question is very easy for you to understand when it's presented to you in your native language. When it's not, it's a very different experience for the student. And so what does that look like in terms of assessment results? Today, most interim assessments, most assessments in general assess students in English here in the United States. And it presents a certain view of that student's proficiency. What you see here on this chart is actually an excerpt of a reporting module from our STAR assessment, where we do interim assessments in English and in Spanish. And what you can see for this student is there's a very different viewpoint in terms of how this student's doing in terms of their academic development when measured in English and when measured in Spanish. And so here's a student that if we only assess them in English, we would see them as well below where they need to be for proficiency. But when we look at their comprehension in their native language, you see that the student is actually very strong in terms of their developmental understanding of the material that's in front of them. And so one of the things that we think about and that we think is critically important in terms of students' understanding and our understanding of how students are doing is making sure that we can somehow pierce that interference that we described before that language acquisition can provide in terms of academic development. So talking about a couple of examples of where big data comes into play for us. One is in how we help and how we support English language learners, and then one is how we assess and project student growth using big data in ways to create insights that go very deep in terms of that understanding of that student's strengths and weaknesses. This is something that we bring to bear across our product line. Just have reflected it up here on the screen briefly, whether it's in reading practice or math practice or in the assessments that we do. There's an incredible focus that we have in bringing data to bear in the best and most robust way that we can. And it's something that we're very proud is recognized by organizations across K-12. We regularly are adding a new seal to our accolades, and we're very happy about those public acknowledgments. But what I would tell you is that what we're more proud of are the personal messages that come to us on a regular basis. So for example, having folks from San Juan schools in Puerto Rico tell us that our accelerated reader is the best offering that they've used for developing reading proficiency in the last 4 years. That's incredibly important to us and incredibly powerful for us. Or if we look at something like Broken Arrow schools in Oklahoma, the idea that STAR assessment results and the insights that they provide to their teachers, the idea that those provide their teachers with the kind of motivation that brings them in the classroom ready to try something new and do something innovative with their students, those are the kind of things that really are that really lift our spirits within Renaissance. And I will tell you, just like the example of the Pauls, Judy and Terry Paul, and their mission that they had in their basement in central Wisconsin, it is really the shared mission that we have as a company across the 1,000 employees that we have here in the US and around the world, in that we are always focused on student outcomes and what it is we can do to help promote student achievement and to accelerate learning for every student in the United States and every student that we touch worldwide. The last point I'll leave you with, which may be somewhat anticlimactic, is all of this has been very good for us as a business. I guess we're in ASU GSV, so we should talk about ourselves as a business. One of the things that's been wonderful about being a part of Renaissance is it's a company that grows every year. It grows significantly every year. It allows us to reinvest in the kinds of innovation that we want to bring to bear in the classroom, and provides that kind of healthy environment that we want to make an environment for all 1,000 of our employees to bring the best that they can to bear for students across the country every day. So I just want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your perseverance in staying away from the bar. And I know that all the drinks are not gone from there yet. And I did have a few minutes if anybody wanted to ask any questions. I'd be happy to take them. Or, yes.
Do you create customized learning pathways at all using the data that you gather?
Yes. It's fundamental to what we do is not only doing that within our own product line, but one of the things that we do as well is we work with a number of best-of-breed instructional offerings that are in the marketplace, and we look to place students into those offerings, help them with progress monitoring along the way, and draw reporting off of our partner solutions to create a deeper and actually broader view of how students are doing. My questions? Yes? Everything is online, so we don't typically have conversations about print versus digital. We are all digital, yes.
All right. I guess the follow-up question would be, think of the profile of students and schools you work with, and my company also has a completely online program, and here and globally sometimes we face the fact that the connectivity isn't very good to power such kind of programs, and sometimes it goes offline, and we have to be prepared for that situation as well. So have you faced that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's always a challenge. So infrastructure varies from school to school to school, and to your point, a lot of the schools that you want to serve the most deeply tend to be the most challenged from an infrastructure standpoint. And so, we certainly will come up with use cases where, you can work in a lab environment that, may be set up with the right kind of bandwidth. But we'll also do things like, work with school libraries and look to other vehicles for, giving students access. Because to your point, if you have a great, innovative, digitally driven solution for students, but they can't use it, it's really not that valuable. So we will look for as many creative ways as we can. And school districts are actually very great at coming up with creative ways to get students access to. But it's certainly a challenge, and certainly will be a challenge for some time now. All right. Anything else? Yes?
What do you think of the word interim?
Interim.
As a CTO.
Yeah, it's a word. There you go. It's a fine word, I guess. Yes.
Are you going to become full CEO or what?
There is, wow, this is really, I didn't realize this is Mike's interview process. There's a process that's going on right now that I'll be a part of, yeah.
But you were formerly the CFO and took over.
Yes, but prior to this, had done a variety of different general managerial roles within education too. So it's fun, it's good, yeah, I like it. Interim, that's the best question of the day. Anything else? Any other embarrassing questions? Questions about my kids, anything like that? All right. All right, well then, if nothing else, thank you guys. I really appreciate your time. All right.